January. The countryside near Naples is quiet, and in the middle of empty fields, a king points at the horizon and says, "Here, I want the biggest palace in Europe." This is the dark story of Europe's largest mansion, the Palace of Caserta. On paper, it is a dream, bigger than Versailles, more rooms than some towns have people, fountains, gardens, staircases that look like something from heaven. But the closer you get, the darker it becomes. To build this place, money has to come from somewhere. Taxes rise. Peasants work harder for less bread. The court in Naples becomes more corrupt, more afraid of its own people. The palace is not just a home. It is a fortress against revolt. Decades later, armies march through these halls. Foreign kings, invaders, secret deals in candlelight. During World War II, soldiers sleep where princes once danced. Bombs fall near the gardens built for royal walks. Today, tourists see only perfect marble and calm water. They do not see the fear, the debts, the broken lives hidden in the walls. So here is the real question. When a palace grows this huge, this heavy, this expensive, does it protect a kingdom or slowly crush it? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Chapter 1. A Palace Too Big for One Lifetime. Your support makes these deep dive stories possible. And the palace we are investigating today demanded support on a scale that nearly broke a kingdom. January, in the year 1752. King Charles of Bourbon stands in an empty field 20 miles north of Naples. The ground is soft. The air smells like wet earth and distant salt water. Around him, architects unroll drawings on makeshift tables while the wind tries to blow them away. Charles is 35 years old. He has ruled Naples and Sicily for 17 years, and he wants something Europe will not be able to ignore. "Here," he says, pointing at nothing. "This is where we build." The architects look at each other. Their boots sink slightly into the wet ground. One of them, Luigi Vanvitelli, steps forward. He is 52, experienced and not easily impressed, but even he seems uncertain. "Your Majesty," Vanvitelli begins carefully, "the site is substantial." Charles smiles. He knows what Vanvitelli really means. The site is a swamp. The nearest town is small. There are no roads strong enough to carry the stone they will need, no quarries close by, no workforce waiting to start tomorrow. But that is not the point. The point is Versailles. Charles grew up hearing about Versailles. His family talked about it at dinner, whispered about it in letters, measured their own palaces against it, and always came up short. For decades, Versailles has been the standard, the symbol, the proof that France is the greatest power in Europe. Charles wants to change that, not by war, not by diplomacy, by architecture. He wants a palace bigger than Versailles, more rooms, longer facades, gardens that stretch farther than the eye can follow. He wants foreign ambassadors to arrive, see the building, and understand immediately that Naples is not some minor kingdom playing at power. Naples is real. Naples is permanent. Naples can build something Versailles cannot match. Vanvitelli understands this. By now, he has already spent months refining the designs. On paper, the palace is breathtaking. 5 floors, 1,200 rooms, 4 courtyards arranged in perfect symmetry, a grand staircase that rises in a slow, theatrical curve, fountains fed by an aqueduct stretching miles into the mountains. On paper, it is a masterpiece of control and spectacle. But standing here in the cold January wind, looking at empty fields and distant hills, Vanvitelli knows the truth. This project will take decades. It will cost a fortune Naples does not have. It will require labor on a scale the kingdom has never organized before. And it will start now. Charles signs the decree that afternoon. Construction begins within weeks. At first, it feels possible. Stone arrives from quarries near Caserta and beyond. Workers come from surrounding villages, drawn by promises of steady pay. Van Vitelli sets up workshops, sketches plans for every floor, every room, every decorative detail, carpenters, masons, sculptors. All of them find space in the growing forest of scaffolding, but the swamp fights back. The foundation work takes longer than expected. Water seeps into excavation sites, workers fall sick, costs rise. The original budget is exceeded before the first walls reach their full height. Charles does not slow down. He raises taxes. He borrows money from Neapolitan banks and foreign lenders. He pressures nobles to contribute funds as gestures of loyalty. The message is clear. This palace will be built, no matter the cost. Back in Naples, people begin to notice. Bread prices climb, taxes on goods, on land, on trades, all of them increase. The royal court issues new fees for licenses, for legal documents, for things that used to be free. In the countryside near Caserta, a stonecutter named Antonio hears about the project. He is 32. He has a wife, a young daughter, and debts from a bad harvest 2 years ago. The palace sounds like an opportunity. He walks to the construction site on a cold morning in early spring. Hundreds of men are already there, hauling stone, digging trenches, building wooden scaffolding that creaks in the wind. Antonio does not know it yet, but he has just joined the largest, most expensive, most ambitious construction project in Italian history, and it will quietly consume the rest of his life. Chapter 2. The traveler who needed a different kind of miracle. And it will take the rest of his life, but Antonio's story, like the palace itself, will wait centuries before anyone truly listens. March 2024. A train pulls into Caserta station just after noon. The platform is nearly empty. A few locals wait near the exit. Tourists with backpacks study maps on their phones. One passenger steps off slowly, carrying a worn leather bag and a notebook with frayed edges. Her name is Elena. She is 29 years old. She works as an architectural photographer in Boston, though works might be too strong a word lately. 3 months ago, her largest client canceled a long-term contract. 2 months ago, her landlord raised the rent. 1 month ago, she maxed out a credit card to buy this plane ticket. Her parents think she is being reckless. Her friends think she is running away. Elena thinks she is finally doing something that matters. The notebook in her bag is full of sketches. Palaces, estates, grand houses from across Europe. She has been collecting them since college. Versailles, Schönbrunn, Blenheim, each one carefully drawn, annotated, studied. But she has never seen Caserta in person. On paper, it is the biggest. Bigger than Versailles. Bigger than any royal residence still standing. 1,200 rooms. A facade that stretches longer than 3 football fields. Gardens designed to rival anything in France. Elena has wanted to see it for years, but wanting and doing are different things. Life gets in the way. Bills, work, obligations. Dreams stay in notebooks. Until now, she walks from the station toward the palace. The streets are quiet. Low buildings, small shops, a few cafes with outdoor tables. The town feels modest, almost sleepy. Then she turns a corner and stops. The palace rises in front of her like a wall. Not a building, a wall, endless windows, repeated arches, stone that goes on until it blurs at the edges of her vision. Elena has seen photographs. She has studied floor plans. She thought she understood the scale. She was wrong. For a moment, she just stands there, notebook forgotten in her hand. The palace does not feel welcoming. It feels overwhelming, impossible, almost aggressive in its size. A group of tourists walks past her, chatting in German. A guide leads a school group toward the main entrance. Everyone else seems comfortable, casual. They take photos and keep moving. Elena feels something different. She feels small. Not in the usual way you feel small in front of a large building. Smaller than that. Like the palace is looking back at her, measuring her, asking a question she does not know how to answer. She walks closer. The entrance courtyard is massive. 4 wings surround a central space big enough to hold hundreds of people. The stone is pale, almost white in the afternoon sun. Every window is identical. Every arch perfectly spaced. It is beautiful. It is also cold. Elena buys a ticket from a booth near the entrance. The woman behind the glass barely looks up. 15 euros. A small map printed on glossy paper. A reminder that the gardens close at sunset. Inside, the entrance hall opens up into something that does not feel real. A staircase rises in front of her, splitting into 2 arms that curve upward toward a vaulted ceiling covered in frescoes. Marble everywhere. Light pouring through tall windows. Statues watching from alcoves. A guided tour group gathers near the base of the stairs. Elena drifts closer, listening. The guide is a woman in her 50s, speaking English with a thick Italian accent. She talks about King Charles, about architect Luigi Vanvitelli, about construction that lasted decades. 1,200 rooms, the guide says, gesturing upward. 18 years just to make it livable. Vanvitelli died before it was finished. His son completed the work. The tourists nod. A few take photos. The guide continues. The king wanted to rival Versailles. He wanted to show Europe that Naples was a great power. She pauses, then adds, almost casually, "Of course, it nearly bankrupted the kingdom. But that is another story." Elena writes that down. Nearly bankrupted the kingdom. The tour group moves on. Elena stays behind, looking up at the staircase, at the frescoes, at the perfect marble columns. She thinks about her own debt, her canceled contracts, her parents asking when she will get serious about her career, and she wonders, what does it cost to build something this beautiful? Chapter 3. A King Who Wanted His Own Versailles. And she wonders, what does it cost to build something this beautiful? The answer begins decades earlier in a throne room where ambition weighs more than gold. The year is 1750. King Charles of Bourbon sits at a long table in the royal palace of Naples. Papers are spread in front of him, drawings, budgets, letters from architects across Italy. He is 33 years old. He has been king since 1735, when Spanish troops marched into Naples and handed him the throne. His father is King Philip V of Spain. His mother comes from the Italian Farnese family. He grew up surrounded by palaces and paintings, with constant reminders that a ruler is measured not only by battles and treaties, but by what he leaves behind in stone. But Naples is not Spain. And Naples is certainly not France. That is the problem. When foreign ambassadors visit, they see a city, busy, loud, full of life. But they do not see power. Not the kind that matters in European courts. Not the kind that makes other kings nervous. Charles wants to change that. And he knows exactly how. Versailles haunts him. Not as a memory, he has never been there, but as an idea, a yardstick, a challenge. Every European monarch secretly measures themselves against Versailles, the palace built by Louis XIV to show the world what absolute power looks like. 100 rooms? Versailles has more. Beautiful gardens. Versailles gardens stretch for miles. Impressive facade? Versailles makes other palaces look like country houses. For years, Charles has heard diplomats talk about Versailles with a mixture of respect and envy. He has read descriptions. He has studied drawings, and each time he has felt something between admiration, jealousy, and quiet anger. Why should France have the greatest palace in Europe? Why should Naples, an ancient kingdom with Greek and Roman roots, accept second place? The answer in his mind is simple. Naples should not settle. Charles makes a decision. He will build a palace that makes Versailles look modest, bigger, grander, more impressive in every measurable way. He summons Luigi Vanvitelli. Vanvitelli is no longer young. He is in his early 50s, trained in Rome, seasoned by large projects. He has built churches, aqueducts, and government buildings. He understands stone, water, and engineering. He also understands kings. When Charles shows him early sketches and explains his vision, Vanvitelli does not laugh. He does not say it is impossible. He listens. "I want it bigger than Versailles," Charles says. "More rooms, longer facades, gardens that prove Naples can rival any kingdom in Europe." Vanvitelli nods slowly. "This will require years, Your Majesty, decades perhaps. I have time. It will require extraordinary amounts of stone, labor, money. Naples has resources." Vanvitelli does not argue. Kings do not hire architects to tell them no. They hire architects to turn desires into reality, no matter the cost. He spends months refining the plans. On paper, the palace takes shape. 5 floors, 1,200 rooms, 4 internal courtyards arranged in strict symmetry, a grand staircase rising through the center like a monument to geometry itself, a facade stretching over 800 feet, longer than Versailles. The numbers are staggering, but numbers are exactly what Charles wants. Numbers are proof. He also wants symbolism. The palace will not stand in Naples. The city is too crowded, too chaotic, too tied to old streets and old problems. Instead, it will rise in the countryside near Caserta, 20 miles to the north, far enough to feel separate from the city's noise, close enough to remain in control of it. This is important. Charles does not just want a home. He wants a statement. A place where the court can gather, where government can function, where foreign ambassadors arrive and immediately understand that Naples is not a minor power pretending to matter. Naples is real, Naples is permanent, and this palace will prove it. But there is another reason for the location, one Charles does not say out loud. Naples is dangerous. The city is crowded, unstable, quick to anger when bread prices rise or taxes increase. The revolt of 1647 is still remembered. Thousands of people, armed with whatever they could grab, rising against Spanish rule. Charles is Spanish by blood, but he rules Naples, and he knows the same streets that cheer a king can, in the right moment, turn into corridors of revolt. A palace in the countryside offers an answer: distance, space, control. If the people become angry, the court can retreat to Caserta, safe behind walls, protected by size. So the palace is both dream and fortress, symbol and escape plan. Vanvitelli understands this. He does not write it in his plans, but he designs walls thick enough to resist more than weather. In January 1752, construction begins, and Naples will never be the same. Chapter 4: The Swamp Beneath the Marble. And Naples will never be the same. But before marble can rise, the ground itself has to be forced into obedience. March 2024. Elena follows the tour group through a side corridor. The guide stops near a tall window overlooking the gardens. Sunlight pours through the glass, warming the marble floor. The site chosen for the palace, the guide says, was not ideal. Swampland, difficult terrain. King Charles wanted grandeur, but Vanvitelli had to work with what nature provided. A tourist raises her hand. Why not choose better land? The guide smiles. Because the king wanted this location. And when a king decides, architects find solutions. Elena looks out the window. The gardens stretch toward distant hills, perfectly ordered. Green hedges, pale gravel paths, fountains catching the light. From up here it looks as if it has always been like this, as if the earth shaped itself around the palace on purpose. But that is not what happened. The year is 1752. The first workers arrive at the construction site in early spring. They come from villages near Caserta, from towns along the coast, from mountain settlements where thin soil barely feeds families. They come because there is no other way to earn. Among them is Antonio, the stonecutter. He arrives on a cold morning in March, carrying tools wrapped in cloth. His wife Maria watches him leave from the doorway of their small house. Their daughter, Lucia, is 4 years old. She does not understand why her father is walking away before sunrise. Antonio walks for 2 hours to reach the site. When he arrives, he sees hundreds of men already working. Some dig trenches, others haul timber for scaffolding. A few skilled masons mark foundation lines with chalk and string. The ground is soft. Water pools in low areas. Every step sinks slightly into mud. Vanvitelli stands near the center of the chaos, pointing at drawings, shouting instructions. He wears fine clothes, but they are already stained and dusty. He does not seem to care. Antonio joins a crew digging foundation trenches. The work is simple to explain but brutal to perform. Dig down until you hit stable earth. Remove the mud. Fill the space with stone and mortar. Move over a few feet. Repeat. For weeks they dig. The trenches grow deeper. Water seeps in faster than they can remove it. Workers bail buckets of muddy water all day, only to find the trenches refilled by morning. One man dies in the first month. A trench collapses. He is buried before anyone can pull him out. They find his body 2 days later. No one is sent home. No ceremony. The digging continues. Vanvitelli orders pumps brought from Naples, wooden machines operated by men walking in circles, turning gears that lift water from the trenches. The pumps help, but not enough. The king visits in April. He rides in a carriage surrounded by guards. He steps out carefully, avoiding the worst patches of mud. He looks at the trenches, at the workers covered in dirt, at the wooden scaffolding rising like a skeleton. "When will the walls begin?" Charles asks. "Soon, Your Majesty," Vanvitelli replies. "The foundations must be solid. If we rush, the palace will crack." Charles nods. He does not look convinced, but he does not order them to hurry. He leaves after 20 minutes. The workers keep digging. By summer, the foundation trenches are complete. Stone begins to arrive. Massive blocks cut from quarries 10 miles away. Each block weighs hundreds of pounds. Teams of oxen drag carts loaded with stone along dirt roads that barely hold under the weight. Antonio is promoted to stonework. He is good with his hands. He can shape a block with precision, trim edges until they fit together tightly. The pay is slightly better. Just enough to send a little extra money home. But the work is harder. Stone dust fills the air. It coats his clothes, gets into his lungs, makes every breath feel heavier. Other workers cough constantly. A few leave, unable to continue. New faces appear to replace them. The first walls rise slowly, brick and stone, layered with mortar, thick walls. Stronger and higher than anything Antonio has built before. Vanvitelli walks the site every day, checking measurements, adjusting plans. He yells when something is wrong. He praises when the work is good. The workers learn to read his moods, to avoid him on bad days, to work faster when his shadow falls across their section. At night, Antonio sleeps in a temporary barracks built near the site. Wooden walls, straw mattresses. 50 men crowded into a space meant for 30. He writes letters to Maria, short, careful messages. The work is hard, the pay is steady. He He misses Lucia. Maria writes back, bread is more expensive. Taxes have increased again. She is managing, but it is difficult. Antonio reads her letters by candlelight. He folds them carefully and keeps them in his pocket, close to his chest. Outside, the palace grows, slowly. Brick by brick, stone by stone. And beneath the rising walls, the swamp waits. Patient, heavy, hungry. Chapter 5. The names no one read. And beneath the rising walls, the swamp waits. Patient, heavy, hungry. But the men who fight it leave traces no architect ever draws on a plan. March 2024. The tour group moves upstairs. Elena lingers behind, pretending to study a fresco. She wants to feel the palace, without the guide's voice, without the crowd, without the prepared script. She slips down a side corridor, narrower than the main halls, darker. The marble here is less polished, fewer decorations. This is not a space meant for kings and queens. A service stairway curves downward. Elena follows it. The steps are worn smooth in the center, polished not by ceremony, but by centuries of work. Servants, staff, people whose job was to move quietly and never be seen. At the bottom, she finds a small anteroom. Plain walls. A single window letting in weak light, no gilding, no frescoes, just stone and plaster. Near the corner, something catches her eye. Scratches in the plaster, faint marks almost swallowed by time. She moves closer. The marks are deliberate. Letters, initials, AM carved carefully into the wall, then worn down until they are hardly there. Elena touches the letters with her fingertips. The plaster is cold. She wonders, who was AM? The year is 1755. Antonio has been working on the palace for 3 years. The walls are rising now, 4 full stories in some sections. The main courtyard is taking shape, framed by columns and arches that reach up toward open air. The work has changed him. His hands are a map of cuts and scars. His back aches every evening. He coughs each morning, thick and heavy, from the stone dust that never really leaves his lungs. But he is still here? Many men have gone. Some died in accidents. Others gave up and returned to their villages. Antonio stays because Maria needs the money, because Lucia needs food, because leaving now would mean admitting that 3 grinding years were for nothing. The workers live in a permanent camp now, wooden buildings, more solid than the first barracks, but still crowded. 200 men sleep, eat, snore, and argue in a space that smells of sweat, smoke, and wet stone. At night, when the work stops, some men drink cheap wine. Others play cards for coins they cannot lose. A few write letters they cannot afford to send. Antonio does something different. He takes a nail, sharpened to a point. He finds a quiet corner in one of the service corridors, a place where the plaster is still soft enough to mark, and he carves his initials into the wall. A.M. Antonio Moretti. He works slowly, carefully, pressing harder with each stroke, making sure the letters cut deep enough to outlive him. Another worker, Giovanni, watches from nearby. He is younger, maybe 20, with a crooked nose from a fight years ago. "Why bother?" Giovanni asks. "No one will see it." Antonio does not look up. Someone might. The king? The nobles? They do not walk in these halls. Someone else, then. Giovanni shrugs. He does not understand. But the next night he carves his own initials nearby just in case. Over the following months, more marks appear. Initials, dates, a few full names. Some men carve them into hidden corners. Others scratch them, where fresh mortar will soon seal the wall and hide the letters forever. They do it because the palace is growing too large to remember individuals, thousands of workers now. Stonemasons, carpenters, painters, laborers, hauling bricks until their shoulders bleed through their shirts. Nobles visit occasionally. They stroll through the rising courtyards, praising the proportions. They discuss which suites will be theirs when the palace is complete. They step around workers as if they are part of the scaffolding. Van Vitelli knows the men by skill, not by name. He calls them the masons, the plasterers, the crew on the east wing. He measures days by progress, not by faces. The king has visited 3 times in 3 years. Each time he walks quickly, asks when it will be finished, listens to reassurances, and leaves in a cloud of dust and horses. So the workers carve their initials, small rebellions, quiet proof that they existed. Antonio finishes his mark and steps back. The letters look rough, uneven, but they are there. He touches them once with the tips of his fingers, then walks away. March 2024. Elena runs her fingers over the faint initials, AM. She does not know who Antonio Moretti was. She does not know if he lived to see the palace completed, if he went home, if he died on this site or in some village no one wrote about. But she knows one thing with certainty. He was here. And for one brief moment, in a dark corridor, he wanted the future to know that. She pulls out her notebook. She sketches the initials quickly. She writes the location, service stairway, east wing, lower level. A security guard appears at the top of the stairs. "Miss, the tour groups stay on the main floors?" "Sorry," Elena says. "I got lost." The guard nods toward the stairs. Elena climbs back up, glancing once over her shoulder at the marks on the wall. The palace suddenly feels different. Not just marble and symmetry, not just a king's dream made solid. It is a monument built on lives, thousands of them. And most of those lives left nothing behind except initials carved in places no one was supposed to look. She thinks about her own work, photographs of buildings, clean lines, beautiful facades, perfect light. She has almost never asked who built them, who hauled the stone, who fell from the scaffolding, who died making something she now frames as art. The guard watches her until she returns to the main corridor. She slips into another tour group, standing at the back, listening without really hearing. Her notebook stays open to the sketch of AM, and she decides this story is not about a king anymore. Chapter 6. Building a Kingdom of Stone and Debt. And she decides this story is not about a king anymore. But the king's decisions still shape everything, especially who pays the price. The year is 1756. 4 years into construction, the palace is eating money faster than Naples can feed it. King Charles sits in his office in Naples, hunched over ledgers. Columns of ink march down the pages. The numbers are worse than he expected. Stone costs more than projected. Wages climb every year. The great aqueduct needed to feed the fountains has turned into a second project of its own, demanding engineers, labor, and cash. His treasurer stands nearby, sweating despite the cool morning air. "Your Majesty," the treasurer begins carefully, "the expenses exceed the current budget by—" "I know what they exceed," Charles interrupts. "Find more money. We have raised taxes twice already. The people will adjust." The treasurer closes his mouth. He does not argue. Kings like Charles are not accustomed to the word no. He bows and leaves. The next month, new taxes appear. Levies on olive oil, on grain, on tools and cloth, and anything else the royal accountants can measure and count. Each rate is small on paper. None of them look disastrous alone, but they do not come alone. In villages across the kingdom, people notice. Bread costs a little more. So does wine. So does the fee to register a birth or a marriage. A few extra coins here, a small increase there, a slow tightening, coin by coin. Maria, Antonio's wife, feels it immediately. She buys less meat. She waters down the soup. She tells Lucia they are saving money for something special, though she has no idea what that something special could be. Antonio's wages have not increased. Every month he sends home the same amount. Every month that amount buys less. He does not complain. Complaining changes nothing. The palace does not care about bread prices. The palace only cares about stone. The year is 1758. The walls are nearly complete, 5 stories high in most sections. Windows cut into the facade in perfect, endless rows. The courtyards are defined now, massive open spaces where workers gather for instructions each morning. Vanvitelli is aging. He is 58 years old. His back hurts. His eyes blur when he bends over drawings in dim light. But he does not slow down. The king wants faster progress. Vanvitelli wants perfection. Those 2 clocks do not tick at the same speed. One afternoon, Charles arrives without warning. He walks through the main courtyard with an entourage of nobles trailing behind like brightly dressed shadows. They point at cornices and arches, murmuring about proportions and symmetry as if they truly understand what they are praising. Charles stops in front of Vanvitelli. "When will it be ready?" he asks. Vanvitelli does not hesitate. "Another decade, Your Majesty. Perhaps longer." Charles's face tightens. That is unacceptable. That is reality. The nobles fall silent. No one talks to the king like that. But Vanvitelli is not a courtier. He has spent years on this site. He knows every wall, every crack, every place where swamp still pushes back from below. He knows that if they rush now, the palace will leak and shift and betray them long after everyone here is dead. "Your Majesty," Vanvitelli says, "we are building the largest palace in Europe. That cannot be done quickly. It can only be done correctly." Charles studies him for a long moment. Then he nods once and walks away. The nobles follow, robes brushing the dusty ground. One of them leans toward another, whispering something sharp. Another laughs under his breath. Vanvitelli turns back to his drawings. That night, Antonio and a dozen other workers sit outside the barracks. They share bread and weak wine. Someone mentions the king's visit. "He looked angry," one man says. "He is always angry," another replies. "Rich men are angry when they do not get what they want fast enough." Antonio says nothing. He is too tired to waste words on kings. But he thinks about the taxes, about Maria's last letter, about the way Lucia's clothes no longer fit, and how Maria writes that she cannot afford new ones yet. He thinks about the marble being installed in the royal apartments, rare stone shipped from quarries hundreds of miles away. Each slab costs more than he earns in a year. The contrast is obvious. It sits in his chest every night like a stone of its own. But what can he do? Stop working? Go home to a village where there is no work at all? So he stays, like everyone else. The palace rises, stone and debt layered together. In Naples, the court grows more nervous. Reports arrive from the provinces. Complaints about taxes, angry talk in market squares, small protests that scatter when soldiers appear. Nothing serious yet. But the tension is building. Charles hears the reports. He does not change course. The palace is too far along. It is his legacy now. His proof that Naples matters, and legacies, he believes, are worth any cost. March 2024. Elena sits in a cafe near the palace, drinking a small cup of espresso and scrolling through articles about Bourbon finances on her phone. The numbers are staggering. Millions of ducats poured into construction over decades. She thinks about Antonio's initials, about the workers who built this place while their families skipped meat, watered soup, counted coins. She thinks about her own debt. The credit card stretched to pay for this trip, the contracts she lost, the rent she cannot keep up with in Boston. Different scale. Same pattern. Someone always pays, and it is almost never the people at the top. She finishes her coffee and walks back toward the palace. The facade glows in the afternoon sun, perfect and untouchable. Underneath, she now knows, the foundation is built on more than stone. Chapter 7. Behind the silk walls. It is almost never the people at the top who pay, but eventually, the palace becomes livable enough for those at the top to move in, and to bring their invisible army with them. The year is 1767, 15 years into construction. The palace is not finished, but sections are complete enough for people to start living inside. King Charles is gone. In 1759, he inherited the Spanish throne and left Naples. His son, Ferdinand IV, rules now. Ferdinand is only 16 years old. The real power sits with advisors and ministers who see the palace as a useful instrument. The court begins its migration from Naples to Caserta, slowly at first. A few apartments occupied, then more. Then entire wings fill with nobles, their families, their servants. The servants arrive quietly. They always do. There is Rosa. She is 19 years old. She comes from a village near Salerno. Her family is poor. When a recruiter came through looking for palace staff, Rosa's father saw an opportunity. Steady work. A place to sleep. One less mouth to feed at home. Rosa arrives at Caserta on a cold morning in November. She carries one bag with 2 dresses, a comb, and a prayer book her mother pressed into her hands before she left. A senior housekeeper meets her at a side entrance. Not the grand entrance tourists will use centuries later. A servant's door, narrow, unadorned, leading into a plain, echoing hallway. "You will work in the north wing," the housekeeper says. "Cleaning, laundry, whatever is needed. You wake at 5. You work until the tasks are done. You do not speak to nobles unless spoken to. You do not enter their rooms unless called. You do not gossip. Understood?" Rosa nods. The housekeeper leads her to the servants' quarters, a long attic room under the roof, 20 narrow beds in 2 rows, a single window at each end. The ceiling slants so low you cannot stand upright near the walls. This is where Rosa will sleep, with 19 other women, maids, laundresses, seamstresses, all young, all poor, all invisible. The work begins the next morning. Rosa learns quickly. She scrubs floors until her knees burn. She carries water up and down steep stairs. She empties chamber pots. She washes linens in cold water until the skin on her hands cracks and bleeds. Up close, the palace is different from the vision seen from the outside. The public rooms are magnificent. Marble, frescoes, gilded details. But behind those rooms run miles of service corridors. Narrow passages where servants move unseen, steep staircases connecting hidden floors, storage rooms, vast kitchens, endless laundries, 2 worlds, one visible, one hidden. Rosa sees nobles only occasionally. They pass through side halls while she presses herself against the wall, eyes lowered. They do not acknowledge her. To them, she is a moving part of the furniture, useful, forgettable. The other servants teach her the quiet rules, which nobles are cruel, which are merely indifferent, which footmen expect bribes, which cooks will share leftover food, how to time your steps so you never collide with your betters, how to move through the palace like a ghost. There is a hierarchy among servants, too. At the top, senior staff who manage whole households for powerful nobles. Below them, footmen and valets who serve directly. Below them, maids and general laborers. At the bottom, scullery workers who scrub pots in kitchens that never truly cool. Rosa is near the bottom. She earns barely enough to send a few coins home each month. But she has a bed. She has food. That alone is more than her family had. At night, she lies in the narrow attic bed and listens to the others breathe. Some cry quietly. Others whisper prayers. A few snore, exhausted. Rosa thinks about the marble halls she cleans, about the nobles who glide over floors she has scrubbed on her knees, about the fact that her name will never appear in any official record of this palace. She does not carve her initials anywhere. She does not have Antonio's small rebellion in her. She simply works. The court settles into routines, meals, ceremonies, audiences, entertainments. The palace now functions like a small city. Hundreds of people living, working, scheming within its walls. The nobles discuss politics. They arrange marriages. They compete for influence over Ferdinand, who is young, uncertain, and easily pushed. Corruption is everywhere. Bribes exchanged in drawing rooms. Favors traded over wine. Ministers quietly enriching themselves, while peasants outside the palace walls struggle under rising taxes. None of this is truly secret. It is simply accepted. Power and money slide toward those who already hold both. The servants see everything. They carry messages. They overhear conversations. They know which nobles are drowning in debt, which marriages are rotting from the inside, which ministers are plotting against one another. But they say nothing. Speaking means losing your position. Losing your position means going back to a village where there is nothing. So they remain silent, invisible witnesses to a world that refuses to acknowledge they exist. March 2024. Elena walks through the royal apartments. These rooms are open to tourists now, restored, protected by velvet ropes. She sees the gilded furniture, the painted ceilings, the elaborate decorations. She does not see the attic where 20 women slept in narrow beds. That room is not on the tour. She does not see the service stairs Rosa climbed dozens of times each day. Those stairs are closed to visitors. The palace shows tourists only the beautiful parts. The rest stays hidden, just as it always has. Chapter 8. A Palace of Many Flags. Just as it has always been. But even invisible witnesses cannot stay untouched when empires rise and fall around them. The year is 1799. The palace is 47 years old. It has already watched 3 different flags fly over its entrance. Ferdinand IV fled Naples in December of 1798. French armies were marching south. Revolutionary slogans were echoing across Italy. The king, his family, and his most loyal nobles escaped to Sicily on British ships. The palace stayed behind. In January of 1799, French troops enter Caserta. They do not loot. They do not set it on fire. They simply take possession. The Parthenopean Republic is proclaimed, a fragile experiment. 6 months of revolutionary government before the old monarchy returns with brutal revenge. But during those 6 months, the palace is not the same place. Rosa is 41 years old now. She has worked here for 24 years. She has cleaned the same halls, washed the same linens, scrubbed the same floors under 3 different regimes. The French officers treat servants differently than the Bourbon nobles did. Not gently, but differently. They sometimes speak to servants directly instead of through stewards. They issue orders without as much ceremony. A few even say, please. Rosa does not trust any of it. Politeness from powerful men is still power, just wrapped in a softer tone. The French turn the palace into a headquarters. Military maps spread across tables where nobles once played cards. Officers sleep in royal bedrooms. Soldiers drill in courtyards designed for carriages and processions. The transformation looks violent, even though almost nothing is broken. Gold-framed mirrors reflect uniforms instead of silk coats. The echo of marching boots replaces music. The servants adjust. They always do. Power changes hands, orders change wording, work stays the same. By summer, the Parthenopean Republic falls. Ferdinand returns with an army. The reprisals are savage. Thousands executed. Suspected revolutionaries hunted through the streets of Naples and dragged to the gallows. The palace stands untouched. Walls do not care who claims them. Ferdinand moves back into his apartments. The French maps disappear. The old routines reappear. Nobles return to their salons. Servants fall back into familiar tasks. Rosa notices one simple truth. The marble she polishes is exactly the same. The floors do not remember which flag flew outside or which anthem echoed in the courtyard. The next turn of the wheel comes in the year 1806. Napoleon's brother, Joseph Bonaparte, becomes king of Naples. 2 years later, in 1808, Napoleon's brother-in-law, Joachim Murat, takes the throne. The palace adjusts again. New courtiers, new uniforms, new languages spoken in the halls. Rosa is older now. Her hands are permanently bent from decades of scrubbing. Her back aches when she climbs the servants' stairs, but she still works. She trains younger maids. She knows the palace better than most nobles who glide through it in embroidered shoes. Murat rules until 1815. Then Napoleon falls. The Bourbons return again. Ferdinand, now styling himself Ferdinand I of the Two Sicilies, reclaims his throne. The palace has seen French revolutionaries, Napoleonic kings, and Bourbon restorations. Each regime tweaks the decor. New portraits on the walls, new furniture in the salons, new styles in fashion, but the structure stays. And so do the servants. Antonio's son, also named Antonio, works at the palace now. His father died in 1778, crushed when scaffolding collapsed during late-stage construction. The younger Antonio was born in the workers' camp, in the shadow of unfinished walls. He has never known any other home. This Antonio is not a stonecutter. He is a groundskeeper. He tends the gardens, trims hedges, sweeps gravel paths, clears fallen branches after storms. He spends his days under the open sky rather than under dust-filled ceilings. Healthier work than his father had. He does not think deeply about politics. Kings come, kings fall, flags change color. Roses still need pruning. He has carved no initials into walls. He has written no letters that survive. He simply works. This is the quiet reality of the palace. For every noble scheming for influence, there are dozens of servants and workers keeping the place alive. They do not appear in history books. No artist paints their portraits. Their names are not listed in official records. Yet without them, the palace would be nothing but cold stone and empty rooms. By 1820, the Bourbon Restoration looks solid. Ferdinand rules again. The court appears stable. On the surface, the palace finally functions as it was meant to, a symbol of royal authority, a center of government, a statement to Europe that the old order endures. Underneath, pressure is building. Movements for Italian unification gain strength. Secret societies meet in back rooms. Pamphlets circulate. People whisper about constitutions and rights. The palace, massive and unmoving, sits in the middle of these currents. It does not know. It does not care. It endures. March 2024. Elena reads a timeline on a plaque in one of the halls. The dates blur together. 1799, 1806, 1815, 1860. Each year marks a regime change, a shift in who sat on the throne. She thinks about Rosa, about young Antonio, about all the workers and servants who passed through these halls while governments rose and collapsed. Their lives were not shaped by grand speeches or royal decrees. They were shaped by daily survival, by wages that never quite stretched far enough, by bodies worn down stair by stair, stone by stone. The nobles who lived here are remembered. Their portraits hang in gilded frames. Their names appear in plaques and guidebooks. The servants are erased, their faces unknown, their stories untold. Elena takes a photograph of the timeline plaque. But what she really wants to photograph is something that no longer exists. The attic where Rosa slept. The barracks where Antonio's father took his last breath. The service corridors where invisible people walked invisible paths for entire lifetimes. Those spaces are gone. Or locked behind closed doors. Or turned into storage rooms with no names on them. History keeps what it decides to value. And for a long time, it valued the nobles. The rest dissolved into silence. Chapter 9. War comes inside the walls. The rest disappeared, but some moments are too large for even palaces to forget. Moments when history forces its way through every door, noble and servant alike. The year is 1943. The palace is 191 years old, and it is about to become a headquarters for a world war. The Italian campaign grinds through southern Italy. Allied forces push north from Sicily. German troops dig in along defensive lines that cut across the peninsula. Caserta sits in contested territory, close to Naples, close to supply routes, close to rail lines and roads, close to everything that matters in a war. In September of 1943, Allied forces occupy the palace. The change is almost instant. The building becomes the seat of Allied Force Headquarters, AFHQ, the Supreme Allied Command for the Mediterranean Front. American and British officers move into royal apartments. Radio equipment fills ballrooms. Maps cover walls where frescoes once showed calm mythological skies. The contrast is brutal. Desks built from ammunition crates stand on polished marble floors. Military cots line up in rooms designed for silk-draped beds. Telephone wires snake through corridors that once echoed with chamber music and court gossip. General Dwight Eisenhower works from an office inside the palace. Field Marshal Harold Alexander does too. Dozens of senior staff officers, hundreds of clerks, radio operators, messengers, cooks. The palace turns into the nerve center of Allied operations in Italy. But it is not only a headquarters. It becomes a shelter. When Naples is bombed, refugees flee to Caserta. The palace, massive and made of stone, feels safer than shaky apartment blocks and wooden houses in the city. Families camp in courtyards, they sleep in alcoves, they cook small meals over improvised fires in gardens once designed for royal walks and polite conversation. The palace becomes something it was never built to be. A refuge for ordinary people, not servants on payroll, not workers in uniform, just people who have nowhere else to go. An old woman named Caterina arrives with her grandson in October. She is 72 years old. Her house in Naples was shattered by a bombing raid. Her son, the boy's father, is dead, killed in North Africa, fighting for an army he never believed in. Caterina finds a corner in the east courtyard. She spreads a blanket on marble that once reflected candlelight from royal ceremonies. Her grandson Marco is 8 years old. He does not understand strategy or front lines. He only knows that his home is gone and that the nights are loud. At night, Marco lies on the blanket and looks up at the palace walls rising around him. 5 stories of stone. Endless black rectangles where windows sleep in the dark. He thinks it looks like a giant watching over them. Caterina knows better. Buildings do not protect anyone. They simply stand. People live or die beneath them. The war grinds on. Battles rage north of Caserta. The palace fills with more people. More officers bent over maps. More refugees hunting for space out of the rain. Military discipline and human desperation collide under the same painted ceilings. In April of 1945, the palace hosts a ceremony that will echo through history books. In the throne room, where Bourbon kings once received ambassadors and displayed their power, German officers signed the instrument of surrender for all Axis forces in Italy. The war in Italy ends. in a palace built to celebrate absolute monarchy, on marble laid by men like Antonio, who never lived to see it finished. Most people in the room do not think about symbolism. Officers focus on logistics, troop movements, and timetables. Refugees outside focus on food and whether their homes still exist. But the building absorbs it all. If stone could speak, it would tell of kings and servants, of nobles and workers, of power that shifted hands again and again while the walls stayed where they were. March 2024. Elena stands in the throne room. A plaque on the wall describes the 1945 surrender. A small black and white photograph shows American officers standing roughly where she is now. The room is empty except for her and a security guard near the door. Tourists passed through earlier. For the moment, it is quiet. She tries to picture it: radio static, typewriters, cigarette smoke, officers in uniform. The weight of that moment, the end of years of killing and destruction, unfolding here, in a room originally built so kings could impress visitors. The palace has been many things: royal residence, military headquarters, refugee shelter, witness to surrender. And through all of it, the marble stayed. The frescoes survived. The facade held its shape. Buildings outlast the people who use them. That is what they do. They swallow history and show only smooth surfaces back to the world. Elena thinks about Katerina and Marco. Did they make it through the war? Did they return to Naples when the bombs stopped? Or did they become two more lost names in a palace already full of forgotten lives? There is no plaque for them, no photograph, no line in the official timeline. History remembers generals. It remembers kings. It remembers the exact date of the surrender. It forgets the woman and the boy sleeping on cold marble in a courtyard, counting the nights until the explosions stop. Elena raises her camera, then lowers it again. What would she capture? An empty room? A spotless floor? Stone that refuses to betray what it has seen. She leaves the throne room. Behind her, the guard shifts his weight and glances at the doorway. The palace waits for the next wave of visitors. It has always been good at waiting. Chapter 10. Too big to save, too beautiful to lose. It has always been good at waiting, but time is patient as well, and stone, no matter how grand, cannot wait forever. The 1950s, the war is over, the palace is still standing, but peace brings a different kind of destruction. The Italian Republic does not need a royal palace. The monarchy ended in 1946. The Bourbon kings are history. Caserta has become a relic. Expensive, impractical, far too large for any single simple purpose. The state takes ownership. Bureaucrats sit around tables and argue about what to do with 1,200 rooms. Some suggest turning parts of it into government offices. Others propose a grand museum. A few even whisper the unthinkable word: demolition. Demolition never happens. The palace is too important, too beautiful, too deeply woven into Italian identity, but importance does not pay for repairs. By the 1960s, the palace begins to decay. Not dramatically, not with a single collapse. Slowly, a leak here, cracked plaster there, paint flaking from ceilings, marble stained by water sneaking in through tired, damaged roofs. Restoration happens in bursts. A project here, a patch there, limited budgets, political priorities elsewhere. A government trying to rebuild a modern country does not have endless money for an old royal dream. Some rooms are restored and open to tourists. Others stay locked, unsafe, neglected, waiting. The gardens do worse. Hedges overgrow. Fountains fall silent. Paths crack and shift. What was once a masterpiece of carefully controlled nature turns into something closer to a managed wilderness. Then comes vandalism. Graffiti creeps onto walls. Thieves pry loose decorative elements they can sell. Homeless people sleep in closed sections. The palace, once guarded by royal soldiers, now gets by with a skeleton security staff. In 1997, UNESCO declares Caserta a World Heritage Site. The label helps. It brings international attention. Some grants, some pressure on politicians. But not enough. The palace is simply too big. The restoration costs are staggering. Every room needs a different kind of expert. Frescoes demand careful cleaning. Marble needs specialist treatment. Hidden structural problems need engineers. The to-do list never ends. A small staff fights against all of this. Curators, conservators, guards, groundskeepers. They love the palace. They give it their careers. Love, however, does not stop a roof from leaking. March 2024. Elena follows a guide into a part of the palace usually closed to tourists. The guide, a woman named Julia, is a restoration specialist. She has agreed to show Elena some of the work the public never sees. They walk through a corridor where scaffolding props up a sagging ceiling. Metal poles like a forest. Plastic tarps hang down, hiding damaged frescoes. Buckets sit on the floor, catching slow, steady drips from above. This section has been waiting for full restoration for 15 years, Julia says. Her tone is calm, not bitter, just tired and factual. Elena looks up at the ceiling. A painted sky, gods and clouds, half erased by water stains and mold creeping in from the edges. What happens if it is not restored? Elena asks. Julia shrugs lightly. Eventually, it collapses. We lose the fresco. We close the room forever. They move on to another space, a smaller room where conservators lean over a damaged wall painting. 2 people, fine brushes, tiny instruments, hours of patient work to clean just a few square inches. One of the conservators, a young man named Luca, looks up when they enter. He has flecks of pigment on his fingers. His glasses are smudged from pushing them up with the back of his hand. How long have you been working on this room? Elena asks. 8 months, Luca replies. We probably have another year to go, if the funding continues. If? She echoes. Grants are renewed every year, he says. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. Elena watches as he returns to work. His movements are almost microscopic. He lifts away layers of dirt and smoke without touching the paint beneath. The care feels almost like a kind of prayer. Why do you do this? She asks. Luca pauses, brush in midair. He thinks for a moment. Because if we do not, no one will. And this, he gestures toward the wall, this is centuries of history. Someone stood here and painted it day after day. It deserves a chance to stay. Julia leads Elena back toward the public areas. They pass locked doors, roped-off corridors. Rooms that are not ruined yet but not safe enough to open. Spaces waiting for a budget line that may never come. The palace is a World Heritage Site, Julia says. On paper, it belongs to humanity. But humanity does not pay its electricity bills. The Italian state pays what it can. Donations help. It is still never enough. They stop at a window overlooking the gardens. From here, the palace looks perfect, symmetrical, eternal. A postcard. People see the beauty, Julia continues. They do not see the cracks behind the walls, the water damage in closed rooms, the structural issues. They think it has always been here and always will be. They do not understand how close it comes again and again to being lost. Elena thinks about Antonio's initials, about Rosa scrubbing floors, about refugees sleeping under the open sky in the courtyards, about Caterina and Marco, about all the lives this building has quietly absorbed. And now the building itself is fragile, dependent on people like Julia and Luca, who spend their days fighting paperwork, limited budgets, and public indifference. Does it ever feel hopeless? Elena asks. Julia smiles. The smile is worn, but real. Every day, she says. And then we save one fresco. We stabilize one ceiling. We reopen one room that was closed. And for a while, it feels worth it. They walk back through the grand halls. Tourists snap photographs. Children run ahead of their parents. Everyone looks up at painted ceilings and glittering chandeliers. No one notices the plastic sheeting just beyond a closed door. No one sees Luca bent over a wall, working millimeter by millimeter. The palace shows the world its perfect face. The struggle to keep that face from crumbling stays hidden, just as it always has. Chapter 11. The People Who Refused to Let It Die. Just like it always has, but some people choose to look past the perfect postcard image and quietly give their lives to what lies behind it. March 2024. Elena returns to the palace the next morning. She finds Julia in a small office tucked behind the gift shop. The room is cramped. Papers are stacked on a metal desk. A computer that looks at least 10 years old hums in the corner. Coffee sits in a chipped mug. Julia is on the phone, speaking rapid Italian. Her voice is tight, edged with frustration. When she hangs up, she exhales slowly. Grant problems? Elena asks from the doorway. Julia looks up. Always grant problems, she says. The regional government approved funding for the East Wing roof. Now they want more documentation before releasing the money. More forms, more signatures, more delays. She waves Elena inside. You wanted to talk more about the restoration work? Elena nods and sits in a plastic chair across from the desk. I want to understand why you stay, she says. Why you keep fighting for this place when it seems so difficult. Julia leans back. She is 53 years old and has worked at Caserta for 28 years. She started as an intern and simply never left. I grew up in Caserta, Julia says. The town, not the palace. When I was little, my grandmother used to bring me here. We did not have money for trips, but the palace gardens were free on Sundays. We walked them every week. She pauses, a faint smile touching her face. My grandmother told me stories, she continues. She said her grandfather worked here, late 1800s, maintenance crew. She never met him. He died before she was born. But she was proud. Her family helped keep this place standing. Julia gestures toward the piles of paper on her desk. I studied art history at university. I could have gone to Rome, Florence. Many museums need staff. But I came back here. This palace, it feels like part of my family's story. I could not watch it fall apart from a distance. Most of her job is not romantic. She spends more time wrestling with paperwork than touching art. Grant applications, budget spreadsheets, contracts, meetings with officials who talk about votes and headlines more than frescoes and leaking roofs. But sometimes she gets to save something. Last year, she oversaw the restoration of a fresco in the north wing. Water damage had nearly destroyed it. The paint was flaking, the plaster crumbling away in chunks. They scraped together emergency funding, brought in specialists, and spent 6 months stabilizing, cleaning, repairing. When we finished, Julia says, we took down the scaffolding, and I saw it from the floor for the first time. The colors were bright again. The figures were clear. And I thought, this has another 100 years now. Maybe more. She looks at Elena. That is why I stay, for those moments when something is no longer dying. Luca, the young conservator Elena met yesterday, appears in the doorway. He is 29. He has worked here for 3 years. There is paint on his hands and a faint line of dust across his shirt. Julia, he says, the supplier is asking about payment for the restoration materials. The invoice is overdue again. Julia closes her eyes briefly. Tell them it is processing, she replies. The payment should arrive next week. Luca nods and disappears down the hallway. We are always behind on payments, Julia says quietly. The government pays, eventually, but slowly. The suppliers are patient because they know we cannot go anywhere else. Still, it is exhausting. Elena asks how many people actually work on restoration. Here at Caserta? Julia thinks for a moment. Maybe 20 people directly involved in conservation. Conservators, technicians, a few engineers. Specialists come from other cities for big projects. But the core team is small, much too small for a palace this size. She turns her laptop and shows Elena photographs, before and after images of past restorations, a ceiling blackened with grime, then cleaned to reveal brilliant blues and gold, a cracked marble floor, then repaired and polished, a damaged statue, then reassembled piece by piece. Each project took months, sometimes years. Each required funding that might not have arrived. People ask why we bother, Julia says. They say it is only a palace, a place where rich people lived. Why spend money on this when there are modern problems to solve? She closes the laptop. I understand that argument, she admits. Truly I do. But this palace is not just about kings and nobles. It is about the thousands of workers who built it, the servants who kept it running, the refugees who slept here during the war. It is a record of human effort across centuries, in stone and paint. She stands and walks to the window. The palace courtyard spreads below them. Tourists cross the marble. Children chase pigeons between columns. If we let it crumble, Julia says, we lose that record. We lose the stories, not only of those at the top, of everyone. Elena thinks about Antonio's initials carved into plaster, about Rosa's endless days on servants' stairs, about Caterina and Marco trying to sleep on cold marble while bombs fell miles away. Those stories exist only because the building still exists. If the palace goes, the stories go with it. Does it feel like enough? Elena asks. The work you do? Julia turns from the window. No, she says. It never feels like enough. The palace is too big. The problems are too many. The money is always too little. She lets that sit in the air for a moment. But we do what we can, she adds. One room at a time, one fresco at a time. We try to keep it alive long enough for the next generation to decide it is worth saving too. Outside, a tour group gathers in the courtyard. A guide begins reciting the official history. The tourists listen. Some take notes. Most raise their phones. They see the beauty. They do not see Julia's chipped mug, Luca's stained hands, the unpaid invoices, the grant applications waiting for a signature on someone's crowded desk. They see the result. The fight behind it stays hidden, quiet, stubborn, necessary, because some things are worth saving, even when saving them feels almost impossible. Chapter 12. A Palace Reflected in One Life. Because some things are worth saving, even when saving them is almost impossible, but understanding why means looking inward as much as backward. March 2024. Elena's last evening at Caserta. The palace closes to tourists at 6. She lingers in the gardens until the guards politely, almost apologetically, suggest she leave. She walks slowly. The light is golden. Low sun filters through trees planted centuries ago. The fountains are still. The water in their basins catches the light like bronze plates laid flat on the ground. She finds a bench near the far end of the central axis. From here she can see the entire palace. The facade stretches endlessly to her left and right. 5 stories of strict symmetry, hundreds of windows reflecting the soft evening sky. From this distance it looks eternal, untouchable. But Elena knows better now. She opens her notebook. The pages are crowded with sketches and quick notes. Antonio's initials in crumbling plaster, the attic where Rosa slept, the throne room where surrender was signed, Luca's paint-stained hands, Julia's tired, stubborn smile. She has been turning over the same question for days. Why did she really come here? What was she actually searching for? 3 months ago, when her client canceled the long-term contract, Elena felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She had built her career carefully, solid portfolio, good reputation, steady income. Then, suddenly, nothing. Her parents called it irresponsible. Her friends called it bad luck. Elena called it failure. She had always pushed herself hard, long hours, impossible deadlines, saying yes to every project because saying no felt dangerous. She photographed buildings beautifully, chasing perfect lines and perfect light. But she never asked who mixed the concrete, who climbed the scaffolding, who cracked their back-hauling stone. Caserta was supposed to be an escape. A dream checked off a list. The biggest palace in Europe. The perfect new hero image for her website. Now watching the sun slide toward the hills, she understands the palace has given her something else entirely. She thinks about Antonio, a stonecutter who spent years shaping blocks for a building he would never own and barely understand, who carved his initials into soft plaster just to leave proof that he had been here, who sent wages home to a family he rarely saw, who died when scaffolding collapsed, and whose death barely rippled beyond Maria and Lucia. She thinks about Rosa, 19 years old, sleeping in an attic with 19 other women, scrubbing floors for nobles who never learned her name, working until her hands curled permanently, living an invisible life inside a palace designed to be seen from miles away. She thinks about Caterina and Marco, refugees lying on blankets in a courtyard during a war, trying to sleep on cold marble while bombs fell somewhere in the distance, looking up at walls that could not protect them from hunger or grief, surviving simply because there was no other option. She thinks about Julia, wrestling with grants and invoices and leaking roofs, saving one fresco at a time, spending decades on work that will never really be finished. Staying because her grandmother's grandfather once maintained this place, and because someone has to care. Different centuries, different problems. The same thread runs through all of them, people pouring their lives into something larger than themselves. People working on projects they will never see completed. People paying prices that others will never even notice. Elena glances down at her notebook, at her cramped handwriting. She thinks about her own maxed-out credit card, about the career she believed was solid until it suddenly collapsed, like Antonio's scaffolding. She realizes she has been treating her own life the way the palace has treated its history, showing only the polished rooms and hiding the corridors, the flawless photographs she posts online, the confident artist statement on her website, the carefully curated portfolio that makes it all look easy. None of that reveals the nights she barely slept, the proposals that went unanswered, the job she took for half her rate because she was afraid to lose the client, the debt, the fear she never admitted aloud. She has been so focused on building something impressive that she never stopped to ask at what cost and for whom. The palace cannot answer that question, but it can push her to ask it again and again, in every carved initial, in every unmarked servant's bed, in every courtyard where people waited, out shelling they could not control. The real question is not, how do we build something grand? The real question is, what do we owe the people who build it? And what do we owe ourselves while we are building? Elena closes her notebook. The sun touches the ridge of the hills. The palace facade turns amber, then rose, then slowly fades into gray. A guard walks toward her along the path. Signorina, we are closing the gardens now. Elena nods. She stands. She takes one last long look at the palace. It is still beautiful. But beauty is no longer the point. The point is the weight behind it, the lives layered into it, the stories it holds even when no one is listening. She walks back toward the entrance. Her footsteps crunch softly on the gravel. Tomorrow she flies back to Boston, back to debt and uncertainty, and a career that will need rebuilding from the ground up. But something inside her has shifted. She cannot name it yet. She only knows it is there. The palace has taught her a hard lesson. Nothing grand is built without someone paying a price. The choice is whether you acknowledge that price or pretend it does not exist. Elena has spent years pretending, photographing beautiful facades, never asking who was exhausted or broke or broken to make them possible. She cannot unknow that now. She does not know exactly what comes next, but she knows it has to start with honesty, with seeing the whole structure, not just the front, with refusing to let the facade stand in for the truth. The guard locks the garden gate behind her. The palace disappears into the evening shadow, but Elena carries it with her now. Not the perfect postcard image she thought she wanted. The real story. The darker one. The true one. Chapter 13. Small hands, big work. The real story. The dark one. The true one. And once you finally see it, you cannot simply walk away unchanged. March 2024. Elena's last morning in Caserta. She does not go back to the palace. Instead, she returns to the same cafe where she drank espresso 2 days ago. Laptop open, notebook beside it. She is writing, not an artist statement, not a portfolio blurb, something different. An email to Julia. Elena types slowly, deletes sentences, starts again. She has never been good at asking for help. She has never been comfortable admitting she wants to be part of something bigger than herself. But she keeps writing. The email is simple. She explains that she is an architectural photographer, that she focuses on historical buildings, that she wants to help tell the story of Caserta. Not the polished tourist version, but the real one. The workers, the servants, the hidden costs, and the people who still carry them. She offers to create a photo essay. For free. She will pay for her own flights. She will come back for a week, maybe 2. She will photograph the restoration work, the damaged sections, the scaffolding, the buckets catching leaks, the people like Luca and Julia, who fight every day to keep the palace standing. She writes, I cannot restore frescoes or fix roofs, but I can show people what is at stake. I can help them see this place as more than a postcard. Maybe that helps. Maybe it does not. But I want to try. She reads the email 3 times. Her finger hovers over the trackpad. Then she sends it before she can talk herself out of it. The reply arrives faster than she expects. 20 minutes later, Julia writes back, Yes, come back. We need people to see this. Elena closes her laptop. She feels something unfamiliar, not quite hope, not quite certainty, but something moving in that direction. She thinks about what saying yes will actually mean. She will have to find a way to pay for the return trip. She will have to explain to her parents why she is going back to Italy instead of chasing new clients in Boston. She will have to admit out loud that she is choosing work that will not pay the bills. That part scares her. She has spent her entire adult life measuring value by invoices, by retainers, by whether the rent cleared on time. But the palace has shifted something in her. It showed her that some work matters even when it does not make money. Antonio carved his initials, knowing no one important would ever see them. Rosa scrubbed floors, knowing no one would ever thank her. Julia fills out endless forms, knowing the palace will still need more than she can give. They did it anyway, because the alternative, doing nothing, was worse. Elena opens her notebook to a fresh page. She does not write a to-do list. She writes a commitment list. She will photograph the palace, the real palace. Not just the grand staircases and gilded ceilings, but the scaffolding and the water damage. The plastic sheets, the rusted pipes, the cracks, the conservators with paint-stained hands, the locked doors and empty rooms waiting for restoration that may never come. She will interview the people who keep it alive: Julia, Luca, the guards, the groundskeepers. Anyone willing to talk about what it takes, day after day, to make sure the palace is still here tomorrow. She will research the workers who built it. She will hunt through archives, look for records, names, fragments of stories. She will try to find out what happened to Antonio Moretti, to Rosa, to the thousands of others whose labor was poured into stone and then forgotten. And she will create something that refuses to let viewers look away, something that says, this beauty cost more than you think, and it will cost more to keep it. She has no idea if anyone will care. She does not know if a photo essay can change anything at all. But Julia's words echo in her mind. We do what we can, one room at a time, one fresco at a time. Elena can do one photo essay. She can tell one story well. She can be one more voice saying, this matters. It is not much, but it is something. She pays for her coffee and walks back to her hotel. In her room, she opens her laptop again and starts searching for flights. That afternoon, she calls her mother. The conversation is exactly as hard as she expected. Her mother does not understand why Elena would go back to Italy, why she would work without pay, why she cannot just find a stable job and stop chasing what sounds from far away, like another fragile dream. Elena tries to explain about Antonio's initials, about Rosa's attic, about refugees on marble floors, about Julia fighting for roofs and frescoes, about how some work is worth doing even when it does not make financial sense. Her mother is quiet for a long moment. Then she says softly, your grandmother would have understood. She always told me, do work, that means something. Even if it is hard. Elena did not expect that. She feels something in her chest loosen a little. I will figure out the money, Elena says. I always do. I know you will, her mother replies. You are stubborn. Like her. They talk a few more minutes. Ordinary things, weather, health, little updates. When Elena hangs up, she still has debt. She still has uncertainty. But she no longer feels quite so alone. She books a flight for 2 weeks from now, 1 week in Caserta, longer if the project demands it. She sends another email to Julia, confirms the dates, asks what permissions she will need for photography, whether there are areas that are off limits, how to avoid getting in the way of restoration work. Julia answers within an hour. She is already making a plan. Which rooms to show first, which staff might agree to be interviewed, which restoration projects are most urgent and most honest on camera. Elena reads the email and smiles. Julia is used to fighting for this place with grants and reports and meetings. Now she has one more ally, small, new to palace politics, but willing. Sometimes that is enough to begin. Chapter 14. What the palace teaches us about time. Sometimes that is enough to begin. But to understand what you are really fighting for, you have to step back and see the pattern that links centuries. March 2024. Elena's flight leaves in 4 hours. She has time for one last walk through Caserta. Not through the palace, through the town. She walks past the train station where she arrived 3 days ago. Past cafes and small shops, past apartment buildings with laundry hanging from balconies, ordinary life unfolding in the shadow of something extraordinary. She thinks about what the palace really represents, not just one king's ambition, not just one building's history, something larger. The palace is a lesson in time, in what endures and what dissolves, in who is remembered and who is erased. King Charles wanted immortality. He wanted his name tied to something so grand that Europe would never forget Naples. In a way, he got his wish. The palace still stands. Tourists still come. His name appears on plaques and in guidebooks. But does anyone remember what he believed, what he feared, what kept him awake at night? The palace outlived him. It outlived his son. It outlived the Bourbon dynasty entirely. The building stayed where it was while the empire around it crumbled. Antonio wanted proof that he had existed. He carved his initials into wet plaster, AM. 2 letters. A small act of defiance against being forgotten? Did it work? Elena found those initials. She photographed them. She is telling his story now. 270 years later, someone knows that Antonio Moretti once stood in that corridor. For a man like him, that is already a kind of victory. Rosa wanted security. Steady work, food, a bed. She got those things, but she paid with her body, with decades of invisible labor, with a life spent serving people who never learned her name. History does not record what Rosa thought about, whether she laughed easily, whether she had dreams beyond survival, whether she ever stood at a window and wished for something else. Those details disappeared with her. And yet Elena knows Rosa existed. Because someone has to scrub the floors in palaces. Someone has to wash linens, empty chamber pots, and keep the hidden machinery of grand buildings running. Rosa's work mattered, even if no one thanked her for it. Julia wants to preserve, not for glory, not to see her name on a plaque. Simply because letting something beautiful collapse on your watch feels like a failure you never shake off, she will spend her whole career fighting for a palace that will always need more than she can give. One day she will retire. Someone else will take her place. The work will go on, or it will not, and the palace will decay. And people in a future century will stand among ruins and ask why no one tried harder. Time does not care about intentions. It only cares about what you actually do. Elena stops in a small park near the center of town. Children climb on a jungle gym. Old men sit on benches talking slowly. A woman walks a dog along the path. Normal life. The kind that never makes it into history books. But this life, ordinary, unheroic, repetitive, is what fills the space between important events. Between palace constructions and wars and regime changes, most of human existence is ordinary. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat, small joys, small griefs, the vast middle ground between triumph and disaster. The palace holds all of that. Kings signing decrees, workers carving initials, servants scrubbing floors, refugees sleeping in courtyards, conservators cleaning frescoes, tourists taking selfies under chandelier light. Layers of time pressed into stone and marble. Each generation leaves its own marks, some visible, most not. So what does the palace teach? It teaches that power is temporary. Charles built the largest palace in Europe. Within 50 years, he was gone, and foreign armies were marching through his halls. The building survived. The dynasty did not. It teaches that pain leaves traces. You do not create something this vast without breaking bodies, raising taxes, forcing thousands of people to trade their health, their hours, their lives for someone else's vision. The beauty always carries a cost. The only real choice is whether you admit that cost or pretend it is not there. It teaches that care matters as much as creation. Charles spent decades building. Julia spends decades preserving. Both efforts are essential. Only one gets celebrated. Creation is dramatic. Preservation is quiet. But without preservation, creation is wasted. Without people like Julia, the palace would already be another pile of stones on a hillside. It teaches that invisibility is not the same as non-existence. Rosa left no letters, no portraits, no official record anyone reads, but she was here. She worked. She kept the palace running one floor at a time. History erases certain people. That does not mean they were unimportant. It means history has been looking in the wrong direction. And finally, it teaches that time reveals truth. The palace was built to project power, to intimidate, to impress visitors into silence. But time has stripped away the illusion. Now we can see the cracks, the debts, the bodies buried metaphorically in its foundations. The facade is still beautiful, yet it is no longer enough to hide what lies behind it. Elena checks her phone. 3 hours until her flight. Time to head toward the airport. She takes one last look around the town. At ordinary people living ordinary days. At the palace rising in the distance. Massive, solid, and yet strangely fragile. She thinks nothing is as simple as it looks. Not buildings. Not history, not anyone's life. Everything holds contradictions, light and shadow, creation and damage, beauty and cost. The palace has taught her to see that, not with explanations, but simply by existing, by standing for more than 270 years and gathering stories the way stone gathers weight. She walks toward the train station, toward the airport, toward home, toward whatever comes next. But she carries the palace with her now, not as a perfect, clean image, as a complicated truth. And for her, that changes everything. Chapter 15. The Light Behind the Facade. And that changes everything, because truth, even when it is uncomfortable, is the only foundation worth building on. April 2024, 2 weeks later. Elena returns to Caserta, early morning. The train rolls into the station just after sunrise. Julia meets her at the palace entrance. They walk the corridors together. Quiet. Empty. The calm before the first tour buses arrive. The light is different at this hour. Softer. It pours through the tall windows and spreads across the marble like a slow tide. For a moment, the palace feels less like a monument and more like a place where people actually lived. Still live. Still work. Elena starts shooting. Not the grand staircases, not the postcard perspectives. She photographs Luca's hands as he cleans a damaged fresco. Fingers steady, brush barely touching the surface. She frames the brown blooms of water stains on a ceiling. She follows the narrow attic stairwell where servants once climbed up and down dozens of times a day. She takes a portrait of Julia at her desk, hemmed in by grant applications and invoices. Shoulders a little slumped, eyes tired, expression stubborn. At dawn she walks the gardens. The fountains are still. The gravel paths are empty. The palace stretches across the water of the basins, its reflection almost sharper than the stone itself. Over the next week, she interviews staff. She listens more than she talks. Why did they stay? What do they hope to save? What keeps them going when the work feels impossible and the money never enough? In the evenings, she dives into research. She looks for Antonio Moretti. In parish records, she finds a few thin lines of ink. Born 1724, married Maria Constanza in 1750. Daughter Lucia, born 1751, died 1778 in a construction accident at the Royal Palace of Caserta. 44 words in a church ledger. That is all official history kept of him, except for the initials scratched into plaster, and now Elena's photographs. And the story she will tell. She searches for Rosa. There are no clear records. Servants did not always exist on paper, but the spaces they filled are still here. Elena climbs back into the attic where women like Rosa slept. She measures bed frames with her camera strap. Roughly 20 narrow beds in a room that should have held 10 at most. She photographs the low ceiling that forces you to hunch, the tiny window. The row of iron bed frames packed so tightly you can barely walk between them. She documents what the official story skipped. On her last day, she stands in front of the palace at golden hour. The facade glows. Endless windows catch the sinking sun. From this distance, it is breathtaking. But she no longer sees only beauty. She sees Antonio's body falling with the scaffolding. Rosa's hands swollen and bent from scrubbing. Caterina and Marco curled on a blanket on cold marble. Julia hunched over forms, fighting for one more year of funding. She sees the cost. She sees the care. She sees the refusal, repeated across generations, to let something meaningful die quietly. She lifts her camera and takes the photograph, not in spite of the darkness behind the stone, because of it. Because the palace is both things at once, dream and burden, masterpiece and monument to suffering, fragile and enduring, beautiful and brutal. And only when you see all of it together does it finally become true.